Hello, everybody. I'm Jill Jonathan. I'm with Joe and Kelly from Red Wine and Blue. We're a community of women who use digital media and friend-to-friend organizing to change the suburbs. I always say that, change the suburbs, change the world, everything. We just want change for the better, honestly. That's really what we want. And so we band together to make that happen. And the three of us are moms, and we're here to talk about yet another school shooting. So, Joe, Kelly, thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Welcome, Kelly. First of all, how are you doing? But I guess we should a little backstory. Maybe if you want to tell people who are watching your connection to the shooting in Michigan State.
Yes, I am. My name is Kelly Dillahay. I'm the state director for Red Wine and Blue in Michigan. And I have twin sons who are juniors at Michigan State University. And we're present on campus or just off of campus last night during the violence that we experienced in East Lansing. And so that's my connection was trying to get a hold of my kids and find out what was going on. And it was a horrific evening and has been a very busy day. We can talk a little bit more about what happened, but I do want to just say thank you to my Red Wine and Blue family for reaching out to me. And our family has had literally people from around the world, calls from England, from Canada, friends and family and neighbors all over the place checking in to see how we're doing. And I really appreciate all of the support that we've gotten.
Yeah, and thank you for, taking the time to talk to us about what you experienced. And, as a mom, I have a question of what happened? Like, did you get a phone call? Did you see it on the news and then try to reach your sons? Or walk me through what last night looked like for you.
So
as much as you're comfortable, of course.
Yeah. My husband and I were watching inane comedies on TV last night, just chilling because it was a long day. And then one of my sons was texting my husband, and at the same time, my phone started blowing up. So with our Aiden and Brady okay, and I'm like, turn off the show. Something is going wrong. So we flipped on the news right away, and at the same time, I'm like, I could see MSU on lockdown, and so the first thing you do is you think, I need to talk to my kid. And so I made a phone call, and I can now, thinking back on it, it was like slow motion because I could, your hands are reaching for the phone and fumbling, trying to type in one of their names. And then the ringing because of, they're 20 years old. They don't answer on the first ring anytime.
Yeah.
So just waiting for the phone to be answered. And of course, they answered like the fifth ring. And they told me they live in off-campus housing with a couple of other friends. And so right away, they said that they were safe. And when we started sharing information about what we knew at that moment, which was, again, just before 9 p.m., they seemed so far removed from the danger that we said, oh, thank goodness you're not on campus. And then we start asking the questions, what is going on? And we're sharing information. So we agreed that they were going to follow the instructions of the Michigan State Police. They were going to shelter in their apartment. The advice was to turn out lights, keep ringers down so that you're not drawing attention to yourself, and stay indoors. Don't go outside. So that is what they were doing. We hung up so we could try to get more information. Meanwhile, my kids start listening to the police scanners because that's what everyone was doing, which at first seemed like it would be helpful, but then was very anxiety provoking because in the chaos, there was lots of information being shared that wasn't accurate, well-meaning, but not accurate. And at the same time, we were watching the news and listening to social media, and there was lots of speculation online too. So it was kind of all this frantic sharing of information and not really knowing what was the right source to turn to. In the end, I was talking to my kids frequently during this. So we agreed that the main source of information was Michigan State Police's Twitter account. That's what the news told us to watch. So that was the official account. That's what we did. But in the meantime, I was getting messages from friends and family and colleagues asking, are you okay? Are the kids okay? I'm friends with a teacher who survived the Oxford shooting. So I cannot believe in that moment, I was very grateful that she reached out to ask me how I was doing, because I've heard her speak publicly, and she talks about how every time one of these incidents happen, it triggers what she's been through. So I was very grateful that she thought to reach out to me, and I asked her how she was doing, and she said, this is tough. Of course it is. So the problem that maybe people don't understand from like the outside, if you were anxiously watching the news to see what's happening next, a lot of people could not speak to their children. My children were just enough off campus that it was okay to have a phone conversation, at least at the time we knew that we could talk. But the kids that were in the dorms were told not to speak, to be very quiet. So they could only text their parents. They couldn't have that conversation. So at least I had the comfort of being able to talk to my kids. But as the situation dragged out over time, and they said the person's on foot, they didn't know what direction they were going. And I mean, we didn't actually have this conversation, but you could tell we were having this conversation among our family. Oh, you guys, if you started walking from that point, you'd be home within an hour. Oh, it's been 2 hours and they still haven't found them. And then you start to think, which are they safe? So probably about a half hour into this, my kids barricaded their apartment with furniture. And the horrible part was when they texted a picture to my husband asking him, do you think that we did this correctly? Is there anything we could do to strengthen the way we put the furniture in front of the door? So that was kind of the low point of the evening, I think, because even though they were saying to me, yeah, we're far enough away, I think we're okay, there was still obviously the fear that it was just widespread, and it's such a densely populated area. The campus is very densely populated, but at the same time, it also has a lot of places where a river is coming through, and it's very beautiful and wooded too. So there's lots of places that make the campus beautiful, but also make it difficult to search at nighttime. So it was just a lot of chaos and speculation online. It just really provoked a lot of anxiety. At 1 o'clock in the morning, when they finally had the press conference saying that the perpetrator was found deceased, we felt much more relieved. And by that point, the kids said they were so exhausted, they just wanted to go to bed. My kids are almost 21. They're going to be 21 next week. So they have a car on campus. So they have the security. If they want to come home this week, they can. I've spoken to them today, and they felt like they wanted to stay on campus and be around other students and friends at this time. And so I'm respecting that because they are adults and they're in communication with me. So I feel that the campus is safe. I feel that they are safe. It's really just knowing that there's going to be a lot of trauma to work through for the students, for the faculty, the first responders, and the community at large. I mean, the campus is very dense, but then there's also a community that's attached to it. It's very all in close proximity. So there's people who aren't associated with campus who live right adjacent to it. So this affected, tens of thousands of people were on lockdown and not knowing what was going on.
My heart goes out to you. This is obviously a mother's worst nightmare, like what you experienced. I'm sure that there's a lot of trauma for you and for your husband too. I hope that your kids are doing okay. It sounds like they are doing okay right now. But I am sorry that you all went through that. I mean, I was reading to your point about how big of a campus it is, that there are 400 buildings and 5,300 acres. And that there was so much uncertainty because there were actually 2 locations where there were victims that are now deceased. And one of those was in the Student Union building, which I guess, can you talk a little bit about that? That's somewhere that's really popular for the kids. They're not kids, for the young people to hang out.
It's a major hub of campus. So Grand River Avenue is really the place where the town center of East Lansing touches campus. So there's always lots of things happening along there. The student union is a popular place to hang out, and it has a big cafeteria in it. So there would have been any given night of the week, probably clubs meet there. It's a place to hang out. And then the Berkey Hall is the home of the social science department. One of my sons is a double major in economics and public policy, so he is frequently taking courses in that building. I mean, if it would have been, yeah, I don't want to say it. honestly, I've worked for universities in my prior career for 20 plus years, and I was on the side of a different university, not Michigan State, but another university in Michigan, where I actually dealt with these sort of issues in the prevention side of it.
Mhm.
So today I've been asked by a few people, like, what could Michigan State have done differently? What should they do differently? They should do nothing differently. They are very well prepared. Who can prepare for this? How about we talk about what we should be doing ahead of time, which is introducing some meaningful gun legislation here in Michigan and dealing with the number of guns and access, the easy access to guns, so that we are eliminating the problem once and for all. That's really where the conversation needs to end up going.
I mean, there's just like no words, because this conversation, we just keep having this conversation.
I
So-
think I shared with you before we started, and I don't want to, this one I can't talk about too much because it's very personal and local here, but this is not the first time my children have been through gun violence at school. A fellow student took his life in 6th grade by gun. It has, have the kids moved on? Yes, they have moved on with their lives, but do they always remember that? Does it come up all the time? Yes. Years later, we're still talking about it. It deeply affected our community, and having to have conversations with children about loss and gun violence at a very young age was difficult. And sadly, you know, my kids have been trained. They knew what to do. So my kids knew to shove furniture in front of the door. I don't know if I would have thought the same thing when I was 20, if that's where I would have gone with it. So in a weird way, I'm proud that my children handled a very scary incident in a mature way, but also, why did they have to? That's the scary part.
Yeah, on that topic, something struck me today when I saw the TikTok from one of the survivors of this shooting, who was a survivor of Sandy Hook. And then I saw several different people and their accounts of being survivors of the Oxford shooting, which was 15 months ago. And I guess that's fairly close, and maybe in the same district as East Lansing. So then now we've got layers of trauma, right? So your kids have experienced gun violence before, and here they are layering on top of that more gun trauma. And we're 5 years today from Parkland, where 17 people lost their lives. And yet here we are having the same conversation that we had then, that we've been having since then. This was the 67th mass shooting this year. It was the 12th school shooting this year. Your children have now been impacted by gun violence related to their schools twice. Like, it's really hard. You to find some kind of like, what is it? Silver lining isn't the word, but what can we do? I mean, what we have to be able to do. We talked about this. We say this all the time. We do not have to live this way. Your children don't have to have now 2 experiences with gun violence at the age of almost 21. So, I mean, I just would love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one thing that we do here at Red, Wine, and Blue is we encourage women to speak to their friends and their family and their neighbors and about issues that they care about. And here in Michigan, and particularly here in Oakland County, where I live, which is where Oxford is located, we've not stopped talking about what happened in Oxford. It is very much a part of our everyday conversations. It comes up all the time. And we need to encourage women to keep sharing with their friends and family what their values are. And then when they feel comfortable doing that, we need to get them to take the next step, which is to, especially here in Michigan, contact your legislature, your legislative representatives in the House and the Senate, and let them know that you want change. We have a chance here in Michigan to do that right now. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And then, you know, as you feel comfortable and grow more comfortable with your voice and taking action, if you want to get more involved in the ways that I have recently, then you can. There's room for you. There's so many organizations, not just Red, Wine, and Blue, but especially here in Michigan, groups that are doing work on this issue that span political parties, that it spans, it brings in moms, it brings in faith leaders, it brings in gun owners. It is polling in the high 80% in Michigan here that people want common sense gun legislation. We have an opportunity to do that here. So in here in Michigan, I said I'm here with Red, Wine, and Blue, but Red, Wine, and Blue has joined what is called the End Gun Violence Michigan Coalition. We've been a part of that for a few months now. And we've been taking on, unfortunately, a very big role today. So I have been one of the people, I've been speaking to media since 7 this morning, I think, doing interviews all across the state, trying to talk about a parent's perspective and also what we can do. So here in Michigan, this coalition has brought up 4 pieces of gun violence legislation, which has to do with secure storage. That's an easy one. Gun owners who are responsible, which is the vast majority of gun owners, want secure, safe storage laws so that children cannot gain access. And that's number one. Red flag laws and universal background checks. And we are also asking for a domestic violence component here in Michigan as well. So those are the 4 pieces of legislation. The legislation has been written. We are waiting for it to be introduced. And we have been working on this. And ironically, have been doing press conferences all around the state the last couple of weeks. And so I didn't think that this was going to be elevated to this level, but unfortunately, here we are. And so we are demanding our legislators to take action this week. We don't even want to wait till the first 100 days are over. So Red, Wine, and Blue will be encouraging our members to write to their legislators right now. And then as a leader of the organization, I'm at the table listening to, being part of the conversation about what we do next. So we're going to be disseminating that information to our membership and working with our partners all across the state from all those different constituent groups to make sure that our legislators take action.
Yeah. And Kelly, thank you for making that really clear for all of us. And it's common sense. And I know the 3 of us are like, duh, why wouldn't you want this? A majority of people want this. What are the barriers? Why are we not getting this? What are some of the biggest barriers keeping us from getting this?
So there are groups or people, individuals out there that believe strongly that when you talk about gun violence prevention, it means that you're taking all guns away, and that's not true. But I have seen that in the work that I do here in Michigan over the last several years. I've seen some of these groups up close and personal, protesting when we're asking for just some simple changes. These kind of laws that we're asking to be enacted have been enacted in other states, and they're very effective at reducing gun violence. So we know that these work in other states, so that's why we're asking for these simple changes.
Yeah, I mean, it is something we talk a lot about how we have more in common than that actually divides us. And so many Americans agree on this idea of stricter gun laws because as parents and family members, like it makes sense, right? It's common sense. And there are measures that do not mean that someone is coming for all of your guns. They're designed to keep our kids and our grandkids and our loved ones safer. I just keep coming back to this idea about the youth today and this reality that they have. Like, that's so different, such a departure from when I was growing up. Like, I'm 48, and Columbine was really the first shooting of that nature that I had ever experienced. And now, when we look back on what children your age, I mean, your kids' ages have experienced, I mean, I would just love to get your perspective on what their reality is like. Because I know I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they've had lockdowns their whole lives, basically, in school. So, I mean, your kids, again, we talked about this too, like the youth of today has a totally different reality when it comes to gun violence than we did growing up.
Yeah, I see that too. And even like I was saying, when my kids were texting me that last night, I was like, oh, that's clever. They barricaded the door. And then what you're saying, that all kicked in. Oh, they knew to do that. They've been told to shelter in place. They knew to turn out the lights. So the picture, I've shared the picture on social media. It's very dark. The reason why is because they turned out the lights. They knew to turn off the ringers on their phone. They knew all of that because they've been trained. I think it was even part of their orientation at the university. They go through some of these things about campus safety. I think it's great that campuses are as prepared as they can be for these situations, but it just seems like we're missing the bigger piece of the picture, which is going back to the very beginning. Why can people easily get access to guns in these situations? That's what I keep going back to. The kids are trained, the staff is trained. I can tell you, I worked in higher ed, and we talk a lot about K-12 and how teachers shouldn't have guns in their hands. You know, that some groups think that that's the way you handle it, is to train teachers and put guns in their hands. And there's a lot of pushback on that. But there's not a lot of focus on what's happening in higher ed. And this is not the first time this has happened. We need to probably look at higher ed too. I mean, not probably. We definitely need to look at higher ed. There's a lot of these campuses need to be open to the public. That's what makes them, their higher education institutions. They're part of the communities. When I worked in higher ed, we wanted the community to come into our buildings. It's learning, it's culture. There's so many experiences on campus for not just students, but the community. We need our campuses to be open and safe. And so they are prepared for these situations. And that's the problem. They still happen when we're prepared. So we need to get to the bottom of, how did the guns get here in the first place?
Exactly. 4 in 10 adults say they live in a household with a gun. A third of U.S. adults owns a firearm. It's a staggering amount of guns. And when you, like, to your point, when you say, like, we are prepared as you can be for these eventualities that are so catastrophic. So what is the common denominator, right? That obviously it's common sense, that it's the weapons. And so I really think it's interesting, because from a perspective of a Michigander, because I was seeing some content today about what you were talking about how maybe I'm uninformed, I'm not sure, but some of the things you're trying to change, they do not have any open carry restrictions. And so what are some of the things in Michigan that make gun ownership something that is easily attainable at the moment?
I will say I'm not a super expert on, I don't want to speak too much into the details of the law, because they are complicated. I will say that I believe all university campuses are supposed to be gun-free zones. So that means that even students, or even when I managed buildings for another university, our staff members couldn't have a gun in their car. That was against policy. And it's meant so that when there's situations, there's not easy access. It takes away that access part of it. in Michigan, we have had, it's not just schools. You've seen us. We've made the news with our state legislature. So state legislature having guns during COVID when there were protests and people were invading coming into the Senate and going up into the gallery. So I have friends who were working down on the floor and they were surrounded by people with guns while they were trying to work up in the gallery. They're literally sitting ducks if somebody wanted to shoot one of them. It's very intimidating. It's very scary. And this is what we have deemed as normal. This is what we think is normal. And so we need to start fighting back against it. And I feel disappointed in myself because I feel like I was afraid. I can say it. It's scary to speak out about something. It's scary to speak out anyway. I learned that last election cycle when we had reproductive rights on the ballot here, and I had to be the person who was doing a lot of interviews about reproductive rights. And at first it was scary, and then I grew comfortable with it. This is scary in a different way because this is talking about weapons, and so it makes another level of feeling intimidated to speak out. But that's what I think is beautiful about Red, Wine, and Blue is that we try to help people to feel comfortable where they're at in their journey to be an activist, if that is their journey. You know, we teach women to feel comfortable to talk first, and then if you want to take action, we help you plug in and find the ways that you feel comfortable with. It's important to write letters to our legislators. That's an easy ask. And then if people feel more comfortable, they can. I have friends who organize rallies and all those sort of things, but we don't ask everyone to do that if that's not where they're comfortable. There's ways that we can make change every day in small ways, but we get our point across. And that's the beauty of Red, Wine, and Blue, I think.
Yeah. And I think, Kelly, like you're hitting on such a good point as I refuse to grow numb to it. I know it's so easy to see another school shooting and just be like, that's just what happens. No, it's not. That is what happens, but it's not right. And I just refuse to grow numb. And I think like having those conversations and just not just pushing it aside and be like, I guess that's just life. I refuse to believe that's just life now.
And I think acknowledging that we're not powerless to change this, that we have, especially a community like Red, Wine, and Blue, there's so much empowerment, woman to woman, friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor. There's so much empowerment going on that we really can see the change that we seek in the world. I do believe that in Michigan, you'll be able to accomplish real, tangible gun safety legislation. I think that Michigan's a great example for other states to follow. I think we have evidence and proof that this kind of legislation works. And I just think we have to keep talking because it's scary. It's definitely scary to have these conversations. And as moms, no one wants to think about this. But if we keep talking instead of, like Jill said, exactly, like instead of pretending that this is just normal and being numb to it, we have to keep talking and having the conversations to move the needle because that's our power. Mm-hmm. And because as moms, right, like as a community of women and moms, like we're not just going to settle for sending our kids off to school every day and being like, well, for me personally, like I memorize what my kids are wearing in case I have to identify them. Like I'm not willing to settle for that reality. I'm not willing to settle for what Kelly and her husband had to go through last night in knowing that their children were barricading their walls. But like the power of a group like this is that we can lift each other's voices up and that we can, in conjunction with each other, actually make change. Like that's so powerful.
Yeah. And Kelly, I just want to thank you so much. I know today has been hard and I just admire you and appreciate you for using the voice that you have. So thank you. Thank you for joining us and get some rest, Kelly.
Thank you. And let's all keep the first responders and the students and the community around East Lansing in our hearts today because there's a lot of healing to go.
Yep. Definitely. And just to let everybody know, please follow us or go to redwine.blue, our website, and follow us on social media. We'll keep you in the know and we'll keep you inspired to keep going because it's going to take all of us. So thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
And happy Valentine's Day.